Yep. Hi, everyone. I think I saw many of you at the grad school panel. So I'm David Moore. I'm a faculty member here, working on nuclear and particle physics and precision measurements.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Morgan. I'm a rising fourth year PhD student working in high energy particle and nuclear physics with Laura Havner. I didn't get to see you at the grad student panel because I was out of town, but happy to talk to you about science communication.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Mira. I'm a rising sixth year, and I work on particle physics as part of the Atlas collaboration. And I'm also really excited about science communication in general. And I'm a co-director for Yale Science Communication. So if anyone's interested in that, um, I could talk about that after some other time. Yeah, and I'm excited to be here and to offer any guidance I could give.
So I think we're going to start with the paper.
Okay, sounds good. Oops. Let me just share it quickly so you can see. Yeah, so this is a whirlwind tour of writing and publishing scientific papers. So it's a big topic. I'll try to say what I can in just like 10 or 15 minutes. But yeah, definitely happy to answer questions on things that I'm not able to cover in the slides. And you'll see throughout, this is such an important topic that it's covered extensively by PhD comics. So there'll be plenty of comics throughout. So yeah, in this one, one method is just to try to will yourself through extreme exertion and hit your head against the monitor, which actually some of us do, but I'll tell you some other tips and tricks for getting it to work. So before I tell you a little bit about the process, I mean, maybe it's fun to see this plot. This is a plot from a Nature paper a few years ago that's called A Century of Physics, and it's showing the number of papers published in the physics area each year since like 1900. When there were maybe thousands of physics papers in some broad definition to now where there's like literally a million or more papers per year in physics. And I show this plot for lots of reasons. I think it's interesting, but also kind of what we do is we produce knowledge and we document that knowledge largely, although there's many things you'll hear about communicating today, but one of the major ways we talk to our peers is by writing and publishing papers. And not only that, the literature is vast and growing. And as a scientist, you are also contributing to this vast and growing literature. And it's super important for many reasons, but one of the things we really take seriously in physics is that we understand things well and that we report true results and that other people can represent or replicate our results from what we publish. And maybe not every paper in this literature is possibly replicable, but I think we're doing our best as a community to aspire to that goal. And then maybe, that's the kind of high level, high minded thing, but very practically, because publications are so important, they're an important part of your career trajectory, your CV, how you move forward in different academic positions if you stay in the field. Okay, so what do you do to write a paper? I mean, the hardest part is actually, I'm not going to talk about, sorry. You have to come up with an interesting idea and a publishable idea, and that usually means something new. Like there's already a million papers a year coming out, and you're trying to do something new on top of that. So that's really the hardest part. Doing the work is where you spend your time. Figuring out when something is ready to be published is a very kind of amorphous, hard to define thing. Publication ready or publication quality. And the best I can advise you is it's super context dependent. It's dependent on the project. It's dependent on lots of things. So talk to the experts in your group, your peers, your mentors, possible co-authors. Many of our papers in this field are not written by single authors. Physics is becoming more and more multi-author papers, especially here in this room. Probably lots of you work on projects with many authors. And so there's a community around that helps you kind of get through this first step. So let's assume that's done and you're ready to publish something. Often, I think what I advise is you want to know what you're submitting and kind of where you're submitting it to. And that can help guide how you actually prepare the paper. Again, this is a very field-dependent topic, but it can help to have a sense or to pick a journal. Really, many of us pick a journal before we get started trying to write up our results. And there's a huge number of really important and interesting journals to publish in. I've kind of color-coded these here by nonprofit and for-profit, which I have a slight kind of interest in. And the ones in blue, the profits these journals make come back to the community, broadly speaking, I'd say. So there are journals published by the American Physical Society, like Physical Review. Maybe seen many papers in PhysRev A through E, PhysRev Letters, PRL, PRX. There's many such journals, and it's a nonprofit organization that supports physics in the US. Same thing for AIP, IOP in Europe, and you can see maybe some JHEP, JINST, NJP. These journals you see a lot. Science is published by AAAS. And then there's also for-profit journals, which are very well known. Many of us publish in NIMA, which is an Elsevier journal. Elsevier has many, many journals. They are a for-profit company, and at the end of the day, they make lots of money off both what you pay when you give them your work for them to publish it, as well as what the libraries are paying them and everything else, and that's returned to shareholders. Same is true with Nature. You would actually maybe be shocked if you've never published a Nature paper, how expensive it is to publish in Nature. But depending on the paper, you might pay Nature $10,000 for the privilege of publishing there. So it's just something to be aware of. And actually, some of us now, like if you get money from the Moore Foundation or other places, there might be requirements. You have to publish in nonprofit journals. So that's kind of a detail, but maybe you're picking the Physical Review. The reason to pick that journal first is you can go to their website and find what the guidelines are, and also look at recent papers, see that your paper is within the scope of the journal. You can probably download, maybe through Overleaf now, a LaTeX template. If you haven't used LaTeX, I put Word here, but really you want to use LaTeX. So when you're writing papers and collaborating with people, especially using LaTeX through Overleaf is pretty much the way everybody does it. If those words don't mean anything to you, ask me, but it's an important way to get started. And some of these journals, especially for letters, certain short papers might have constraints that you have to like really meet. If you go over the word count in PRL, they're going to send it back to you without reviewing it until you get it within the word counts. So knowing all these details is kind of contingent on choosing where you're going to publish, and then you got to make sure your publication fits in that specific format. And step 0, figure out where you're publishing. I would say the next step is maybe to outline the paper, like what are the big ideas? And some of us, I especially like to figure out what the figures are. Can't put infinitely many figures in. Pictures really are worth 1,000 words. I'll say a little bit more about that. And if you kind of outline the paper with the major results as presented in visual figures, that can help you kind of structure the paper and then come back. And then, maybe figure out what methods, kind of results, kind of details you need for other people to understand and reproduce your work. What do you conclude? And no paper has ever really finished the field. So like, where are you going next? What are the obvious next steps? So once you have that outline, you run it by your collaborators, you can start putting together your first draft. And then it's up to you, once you have, as you start to do this part, how careful you want to be. Many of us just basically are further on the spectrum to keep pressing random buttons. Sometimes it helps you get something down and then come back and refine it. But this is a process that can go different ways for different people. So here's an example of the basic structure that many journals will follow. This is actually a paper from Physical Review Letters, PRL. As I said already, you probably want to use LaTeX, which is a typesetting kind of markup language that now you can collaborate with many people easily, sharing documents in a web editor. You can also interface it with Git, and it's a good collaborative tool in addition to being able to handle your technical writing, equations, figures, and especially references much better than tools I'm aware of in Word or any other way to do it. Part of using LaTeX is to use a reference manager that helps you with the references. The power of this tool is that it helps you with references. And so you want to use BibTeX and not do your references yourself. Again, if these words don't mean anything to you, please ask. And many of us, instead of doing BibTeX by hand, want to use a reference manager. I highly encourage you to have a set of papers that you're understanding from the literature, that you're tracking on your computer, that are relevant to you. There's a library of those papers, and the nice thing about having that is with something like Zotero, which is a free tool to do this, you can also have the tools that help you quickly generate BibTeX files for doing the referencing of your papers. So I don't know, does anyone recognize this paper? It's kind of a funny Physical Review letter. It's a little small, but maybe this little waveform here is this Nobel Prize winning result from about 10 years ago. So this is like a chirping signal, like a whoop. Yeah.
Is it LIGO result?
Yeah, this is the first LIGO gravitational wave detection from merging black holes, and here are the waveforms in Hanford and Livingston. This is an interesting PRL because usually you only have 4 pages in PRL. For this, they got like 11. So cutting out a lot of pages here. That's a one-time thing as far as I'm aware ever. But the basic structure is always the same. You kind of have this title, you have an abstract, which many of us write last. I'll say that in a second, which kind of highlights in just a few sentences what the major kind of motivation, kind of methods and results were from the paper. And the reason I say to write this last is, when you're writing, you're figuring out your figures, you're outlining the paper, all that, you might not have really put together the full story yet. And by the time you got the whole thing out, you can maybe more easily really write something that if somebody's only going to read one short part of your text, it's going to be that abstract. And then there's an introduction, which might be here, the first kind of half page. The bulk of the paper is the methods, the results, the figures, the things we were talking about. And in this case, yeah, it's many pages. And then there's some conclusions, outlooks. There's always some acknowledgements, which are super important for your advisors too, and acknowledging the funding that's used in these papers. That's often a requirement from the funding agencies. And then lists of references, which you've already kind of done automatically with BibTeX, you cite them throughout the work as you're doing, and BibTeX helps format these and get them in the journal form. So that's the kind of, that structure is the same for any physical review journal kind of, but maybe the length limits, how much space you have for all these things is kind of different depending on context. I would say the other thing to be aware of is, many people interact with papers these days on the archive. I'll say a little more about that. They might look at the title first. So you want a good title that catches people's attention and explains what you're doing, but maybe not in a too flashy way. If they get past the title, they might read the abstract. And so you want that abstract to be kind of fully informative of someone who's looking at like maybe 50 papers in some of the archive feeds. Maybe they'll scan the abstract. And if the abstract's exciting enough, maybe they'll look at the figures. And so really putting time and getting those things to communicate your science is important. The rest of the paper is also super important because a fraction of people in the community will read the whole paper, but those 3 things are what the vast majority of people are going to get from you. Any questions? I know I'm going fast just because I want to stay on time. We keep going. So, I'll be quick. I mean, the abstract, I already said this, it's maybe only 5 or 6 sentences, but it has the whole kind of motivation, results, and conclusions. As I said, maybe you want to write this after you've actually written the first draft, so you really know what you're going to say. It helps, maybe get everything down and then come back and try to really distill it in your mind. And this is really like, what are the 2 or 3 things you really want someone, if they don't read the paper, to know? And I think these slides will be posted, so you don't need to get every word here. So, I'm talking maybe mostly about papers, but you also need to write abstracts for talks. Same kind of goal, although maybe a different audience, maybe a different kind of motivation in some cases. Often it's common for your talk abstract to be less specific, but you still want to get people to show up, especially at an APS meeting or something where there's 10 parallel sessions. You want to, get people interested, give the big results or big ideas you'll be talking about. Sometimes the talk abstracts are vague though, because sometimes you submit them 6 months before the conference and you haven't even done the work. And so there's an art in writing an abstract that's both interesting and you can talk about what's said in it no matter what. So it's actually very common to say, we'll discuss a relatively vague thing, and then wherever you get, you can show the results you have. And then, if you take one lesson from me, it's don't listen to me. For the journal, for the conference, whatever it is, go look at examples, see how people do it. There's no hard algorithm or rules for this stuff, but you can get a sense of the strategies other people are using. And because there's some culture and community dependence on this stuff, looking at the specific venue you're talking about is really important. Yeah, so here's the comic about submitting in 7 months. I don't know, I have no idea what the results will be. And the trick is to make it as vague as possible. More ambiguous, the better. That's why it's called an abstract. Okay, so I have a whole slide on figures just because I think this is really important. For many of us, it takes a lot of time to make figures, and I'll just say, figures really are worth 1,000 words, and a lot of the science communication you do in papers, also in talks, in many examples in your life, come from being able to visually convey your information in your papers. And like I said, if people make it past the title and abstract, probably they're just gonna look at the figures and read the captions. So some people really aim to have the whole paper understandable from the figures and the captions for your average reader. So I have a quote unquote bad plot or good plot, although again, this is very context dependent. Here's my bad plot. Anybody still use root? Does this look familiar? Okay, so those of you using root, maybe see this is just like the default style. What else? Is there anything wrong with this? Like, what do you see here? Some missing things. Yeah, no labels, definitely that's bad. There's an uninformative title. Axes are too small when it's printed. This might be much smaller than the text in the rest of the paper. You want to avoid that. There's gonna be rules from your journal on that. Also, you're taking a lot of words, especially if you're like writing a letter or something. These figures count against your words, and there's a lot of white space here. And you know, that's again a style thing. You don't want to jam your plots too dense. That can be a problem on the other side, but you are trying to use your limited space in many cases efficiently to convey information. So I call this one on the bottom a good plot. This is actually from Microboon when they weren't finding sterile neutrinos, sadly, a few years ago. I say this plot, you know, this is very field dependent. It's in my field, but I say it conveys a lot of information to an expert, somebody looking at this in the field. Oops. So their data here are in black. They have some models which are nicely colored in blue. And even though there's a ton of information on the plot, I can look at all of these colors and as an expert know what they mean. And also see that they expected to see a signal here if there was some sterile neutrino-like object, and they don't see it. I mean, the black points don't look like the red line. And the labels are nice, you know, literally probably hundreds of people looked at this plot and refined it in some stage of editing. So this had a lot of eyes on it, but you know, after that kind of caretaking, I think you can really communicate a lot of information plots. So bottom line, it takes a lot of time to, you know, not just get the default plot coming out of root. I think AI agents are also really bad at making, you know, coding agents are sometimes really bad at making aesthetically useful plots for humans at this point, at least. And this is still a place where you really are much better than any coding help. And being able to visually communicate your science is super important. And it takes time, but it's worth the effort. Okay. Another really super important thing are references, because in those millions of papers you saw, we're always building on knowledge that already exists. No paper is, you know, solved all of physics in one work. And so understanding the prior literature and then contributing it to with your publication is really a super important part of the publication process. And, you know, just ethically, you want to be sure that you're, you know, acknowledging the work that's come before you, that you're building on in any paper. And often, as you saw, there's millions of papers. Maybe there's a huge body of literature you're building on. If there's too many papers to cite and it's a mature field, you can cite kind of these review articles that summarize a large body of work to cover lots of things. But you should try as much as possible to find and cite the most relevant publications and only the most relevant publications. And there's, you know, a spectrum of that, but you know, there's both too much citation and then too little citation you have to worry about. So you should definitely support anything your paper builds on. If you're not aware of what's relevant, you probably should do that before you start writing the paper. But when you write the paper, you really need to be sure you go back and read the literature and understand the citations. And there's these tools like Inspire in our field, ADS, Google Scholar that you can use to trace the web of citations. So if you find a paper you're really like citing a lot, you should look at what other papers cite it to see what the contemporaneous papers are, and you can do that. You can follow these webs of citations with these kinds of tools. And it's super important not to just read the title of the paper you're citing, but know what's in that paper, and it's actually the paper you should be citing. It's the PhD comic. I added all these references, just like you asked, great. Oh, wow, did you read all these? Well, of course. Okay, define read. Okay, maybe you need to reference a dictionary. So like, you know, there's some classic apocryphal stories like spinach has a lot of iron in it, if you've heard that. The claim is that that was a miscite and people just kept citing it. I think even that story is a little bit apocryphal, but it shows you that you can hear something a lot and maybe people tell you something a lot, but if you haven't gone and read the paper, you should maybe check it and make sure it really says what you think it says. And then super important once you get the draft, those are all the sections maybe. Now you need to revise, and most of the time writing the paper is often for us in revisions, especially in large collaborations, there's going to be a lot of revision. There's first the revision stage with yourself, and then maybe additional stages among your co-authors, people signing it directly, your advisor,
If you're in a collaboration, there's probably an internal review process you have to follow, and a committee of people who are maybe interested and not interested in your paper, or a little farther from your paper. And then once you get through that, you can submit it. I'll say a little more about that quickly. And then you're going to get peer review. The whole point of the journal is that there's also completely independent people, anonymous in almost every journal, that read your paper and give you comments back. And you have to typically respond to those comments, or at least convince the editors that you are correctly understanding any comments on the paper. And in some, I'd say relatively rare cases, after you've published, somebody might write a erratum or a comment paper on it that you might then respond, and possibly if someone writes, points out an error in the paper, you might write an erratum for the paper. So revising really is how you get from the draft to like a real publishable piece of work. It takes a lot of work. This is draft infinity. And at some point you really do get sick of it, and maybe that's the time you turn it in. Yeah, so let's get this one. So once you have it revised, you submit the paper for peer review. What do? The vast majority of us will put the preprint on archive as soon as it's ready to go. So probably you all are familiar with archive, but this is a website. It used to be run by Cornell. It's now spinning off into a nonprofit that collects with no paywalls, essentially all the papers in our field before they go to the journals. And at the same time, roughly, you submit your manuscript to the journal. You can either do it right at the same time, or you can wait one day, get the archive number, and many journals will allow you to just type the archive number in, and they get the files from there, and you can submit it that way. Then you wait several weeks, and several with a tilde, that can actually be uncertain time, especially these days. There's a ton of AI generated stuff coming into lots of journals, and those times have way slowed down all of a sudden. But after some amount of time of reviewing, the editors will have identified peer reviewers, they'll give you comments, and then you revise your paper and maybe resubmit. You might have to repeat that n times. And then eventually, as you get through that process, the paper is either accepted or rejected by the editors of the journal. It can be rejected. That's part of the process for lots of reasons, including fit to the journal, not just technical correctness. And then you would revise and resubmit to another journal, typically after maybe you need to take more data, maybe you need to do major revisions, reframe the paper, something like that. If it's accepted, great, but you still have one more stage of revision. They send you proofs of the final thing. You have to really carefully check those. They do make typesetting errors or do funny things. So you get one more chance to make sure everything's perfect. And then I highly recommend you update the archive posting, not with the copyrighted version of the journal, but the exact same text that was published in the journal after all your revision. Copy editing, if possible, should be updated to the archive. And then you start it again. Okay, so that's it. Happy to answer any questions.
Yes.
This is rather like a specific, but is there a specific software that people use for making good plots?
I think many of us do it in like Python, Root, whatever coding tool you're using to do your data analysis, you're probably making the plots in that kind of general purpose language. So I would say like matplotlib in Python or other Python plotting tools is probably most common in many physics fields. But again, it's really dependent on your project.
To build off that, you should talk to your lab about it, because like when we use Root, Morgan shared me a file that was like, this is the outline of what we always use our plots for. So typically like labs will have something like that, at least is my knowledge. Collaborations
are excellent at this kind of stuff. So if you're in a big collaboration, sometimes you have plotting rules and packages and all this stuff. Yeah. Some of us in smaller projects have more informal. Yeah.
Follow-up question. So the archive is completely free, and then the journals can be for-profit or non-profit. If we post them on the archive as well as in the journal, how is the journal like making money if we can just go to the archive and get the free thing anyway?
It's a little bit funny. Honestly, I'm happy to discuss this after because it's kind of funny. So honestly, the journal holds a copyright of their typeset version, but the words are yours, largely speaking. There's no journals, like Nature used to be funny about this and not let you put it on the archive before. All that's gone because people just would stop submitting to those journals. And so now we're in this funny state where you can put exactly the same words, just not formatted the way of the journal, and you own the copyright to that and can put it on the archive. And it's best practice to make sure that there's a freely available preprint to the public who funded your science at the same time there's some paywall journal thing. We just kind of live in that kind of weird world right now. the business models are feeling lots of tension, and who knows how it will evolve going forward.
Why I'm wondering, how do we handle multiple different papers at the same time? Because I know a lot of PIs have to do this.
Yeah, that's a general question I'm also happy to chat about after. Like, doing lots of things at once is always hard. I would say that some of these processes take a lot of time. So maybe in parallel, you're working on various stages of revising, writing, doing the work on different papers. That's a challenging problem to manage your time, but it's maybe the same sorts of skills you have in any sort of project. You're working on lots of things at once.
Thanks. I think it's now time to switch over to talking about conference presentations.
Yes. So thank you. Hold on, let me just share. Okay, so thank you guys for having me here. So last year I spoke on this panel and was talking about communicating science to the public, but now I'm gonna switch topics and talk about communicating to other scientists. So I'll give some framework for how to prepare a talk, handle questions in the room, and how to use the conference and really take advantage of it, as opposed to just those 15 minutes that you're speaking. So first, I want to define what a successful talk looks like, because a talk isn't necessarily just to speak to people for 15 minutes and then have people forget about it. It's really an invitation to engage with people who are also interested in the kind of work that you do. So there's three main pieces that contribute to a good talk. First, one's slide should be polished enough that people could follow the question, method, and the main result that you're presenting. Additionally, you should respect the clock. Going over time could be annoying because it steals time from questions and from the next speaker. So it's really important to be mindful of that. And third, the goal isn't to impress everyone in the room. It's just to connect with the few people who are genuinely interested in what you do. Now, especially like science has become so specialized that it's unrealistic to expect like an entire room of people to be interested in the specific thing that you work on. So even when an audience is made of physicists, it could still be a mixed audience. If you're giving a talk at a group meeting, you could assume that everyone knows exactly what you're doing, and that would be the fastest paced talk. If it's a subfield workshop where there's like 50 other people who are in your exact subfield, you could assume that everyone knows the general problem and motivation, but not necessarily your exact method. And a broad conference like APS is a really good opportunity to talk to people who haven't necessarily thought about your subfield in years. And this is the same lesson as public science communication, where you should know your audience first and make sure before every slide to ask what the audience already knows and what they need from you before the next idea makes sense. A piece of advice that I have is that before opening PowerPoint, it's good to write the ending of the talk in one sentence and think about the overall picture that someone should remember, even if they forget every technical detail. Then you could work backwards and think about what evidence earns that claim. Is it a plot? Is it a comparison with previous work? Is it a method that makes a measurement possible? And then after that, you could decide what background is actually necessary. Because sometimes giving too much background could detract from your actual contributions. So you should be careful to kind of balance that. And it's usually good to try to have 2 or 3 main points as opposed to like 6 or 7, just so that there's less things for people to remember. And an important part of giving a talk is structure. So the audience can tolerate a lot if they know where they are in the talk, but if the structure is unclear, it's much easier to get lost. For a short talk, like a 15-minute talk that one would give at an APS parallel session, I usually think in chunks. So you could think about the question, just enough background, the method, 1 or 2 results, and then why that result matters. So you don't need a long outline if you're giving a short talk, but you do need some kind of roadmap. So it could help to have a good final summary slide or a good overview and introduction slide. And especially with the summary slide, that's what'll stay up during questions. So here I'm giving an example of a slide from a talk that I gave that I was told was good. I'm just showing it because it gives it does a few things clearly. So the audience gets the big picture from the title, and there's a short motivation sentence, and then a small map of the physics logic. So even though it's not a formal table of contents slide, it still gives people structure and makes it pretty clear what I'll be talking about in the talk. So a conference talk is not supposed to be just a paper in PowerPoint form. It's supposed to convey things more simply and not include as much detail. There is a bit of tension because some subfields, like mine, for example, like slides to be pretty dense just because the slides serve as documentation for people to use in the future, and people will read slides that they didn't even attend the talk for. But then other subfields, like some theorists I've noticed, really dislike when a slide is very dense. So this is really something you should ask your advisor or group about. But so basically, there's not always one right answer for how dense and readable slides should be. But you should make sure that you don't just have like massive paragraphs or formulas on the slide. And some practical tips is to label plots and to make the labels large. And you could use animations to direct attention. Also, something to think about is that I think roughly like 2% or something of the population is actually colorblind. So it's a good idea to use a colorblind color palette, which you could just Google and find. And also make sure to always credit people on slides, because people will get really upset if you show like a plot or work that they've done that they haven't gotten credit for. And it's not rude at all to borrow figures, data sets, or any work that other people have done, as long as you just make sure to cite them. And also, just a quick tip, if you don't understand something, don't put it on the slide. Like, you should be comfortable with everything that you put on a slide, because you never know what people will ask. And here, this is an example of a talk I gave at an internal Atlas meeting. And here I only have 2 plots, and the sentence at the top tells people what they're looking at. And then the captions under each of the plots explains what the plot is doing. And the bottom box also states the current goal, which could be useful because a plot really speaks for itself. So it's nice to have a mix of graphics and bullets, just so people know what the figure's communicating. And if I had to pick one practical tip, it would be to watch the time. It really does matter. And a 15-minute slot shouldn't become a 17-minute talk because you want to squeeze in one more slide. Also, it's really good to practice out loud since reading silently isn't the same thing. You can discover awkward transitions in places where the logic jumps or places where the slides need a better setup. Also, if you're in a research group, you might want to practice with other members of that group or your advisor so that they could ask you questions or help you prepare for the kinds of questions you would get. And also, it's a good idea to bring some sort of watch just so you could time yourself. So, good delivery in a talk isn't about pretending to be a different person. It's just about making the audience feel guided. So the big things are pretty simple: to face the room, not the slide, pause after the main point, and sound like you care about the result. So physicists are generally a really forgiving audience, but conferences could be tiring. So it's good to have a little bit of energy. And transition phrases are useful because they tell people how to listen and emphasize what's important. So one thing I know a lot of people worry about when giving a talk is the questions that they'll be asked at the end. And I've noticed that questions are really a mixed bag. Like sometimes people will ask for a basic definition, and sometimes people will ask a question that's more complicated than the talk itself. And that's pretty normal. My preferred way to answer a question is to listen, then restate the talk, restate the question, then answer, and then bridge if needed, which is just saying that you'll follow up later on and look into it. The reason I restate the question is if I need a second to think, and also it helps the rest of the room hear it. And the most important thing I could say about this is that if you don't know the answer, say you don't know, because bluffing will make things worse and will just end up making you look bad. And it's totally okay not to know the answer to things. So now I just want to talk about the rest of a conference. So as I said in the intro, a talk is an excuse for conversations. So before you arrive, it's nice to check the agenda, the participant list, and the social events. And then during the conference, when people are giving talks, I like to take notes and ask people questions. And during coffee breaks, talk to anyone that I wanted to meet. And afterwards, if you meet someone and have a useful conversation, you could follow up and email them. One thing I've noticed from my own experience is that big conferences can feel a bit impersonal, especially for students, but that's totally normal. And smaller workshops often make it easier to find the people who are genuinely interested in your work. So, really, the goal is to talk to people who are genuinely interested in your work, even if that's just a few people. And just to close, I'd like to come back to 3 questions, which is what's the story, where the audience should look, and what happens next after the talk. So if those 3 things are in place, you're in good shape. And in the last 48 hours before a talk, I'd suggest specifically checking the audience, making sure that you have a clear take-home message, making sure that your slides are readable, rehearsing your talk to make sure that it doesn't go over time. And it's also good to have a short elevator pitch for conversations you'll have in the hallway or during coffee breaks. And a good talk does not need to be perfect. It just needs to be clear, on time, and useful enough to start a conversation. So thank you. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mira.
Thank you.
We'll move to Morgan and the public, we can do the public part.
Okay. There we go. Okay, yeah, so yeah, my name is Morgan. I'm giving a talk on science communication and engaging with the public. So I'll first answer the question, why should you be listening to me on this topic? The short answer is that I've taken on a lot of roles throughout my undergrad and PhD that involve communicating science to a lot of different people. And in doing that, I've overcome an intense fear of public speaking. It may not seem like it, but I've had severe social anxiety for a long time. And my very first presentation that I gave in high school, I actually fainted from anxiety. So I've come a long way since then. And I actually love talking to people and speaking in public. The primary thing I'm doing these days is advocacy in Washington, DC to talk to lawmakers about funding various science projects and various laws that are backed by scientific results. If you're interested in learning more, talk to me after this about getting involved in the Yale STEM Hill Day. I've done quite a bit of outreach and mentorship, most recently through Yale's Gender Representation in Physics. And this has been a lot of fun, a great chance to talk to like younger people and students who are interested in physics. And I recently became the ALICE Collaboration and Diversity Officer. So with such a big collaboration, we have a whole office dedicated to DEI and related stuff, which is super, super cool, something that we haven't been getting in the US lately. So yeah, those are all kind of avenues where I'm talking to a lot of different people, a lot of different scientists, and communicating various things about science in a lot of different ways. So to talk about why we want to communicate with the public, the primary reason and what I think is most important lately has been building trust in science and with scientists. In early 2026, a survey was done and only 28% of US adults say that they have a great deal of confidence in scientists to act in the best interest of the public. Another 49% have a fair amount of confidence, but there's a wide partisan divide on this. COVID-19 has really hurt public perception of science despite all of the great advancements that were done in that time. So clearly there's a lot of like misunderstanding between scientists and the public. But people are interested in science. 3/4 of American adults say that they liked science in their like kindergarten through 12th grade education. And in 2016, a NASA-funded survey found that over half of Americans are interested in science, at least like as lay people or like interested in science as a hobby. But only 28% have high enough science literacy to engage in policy level discussions about STEM. So that's really suggesting that like a lot of what people are voting on, they don't quite understand. There's a wide public perception of what a scientist is in the public, and I call these the Sheldon stereotypes, because that's what I think that show encapsulates very well. 89% of US adults say the word intelligent describes most scientists well, but in the same survey, 47% said that they view scientists as feeling superior to others. 45% describe scientists as good communicators. 36% view scientists as not paying attention to the moral values of society. 34% view scientists as cold and closed-minded. So that's kind of uncomfortable to hear, right? That like this is how a significant number of people perceive scientists, and like people have this conception of what a scientist is that I think clearly doesn't describe a lot of people in this room. So there's a lot that we need to do to build excitement about science and encourage young people to pursue science in a way that shows that anyone can be a scientist and that scientists are, at the end of the day, people like everybody else. I'll talk about different types of science communication because I think when we think about communicating science, we think a lot about things like conferences and papers. So the primary way I think science gets communicated to the public is face-to-face. So things like public talks. So on the right, I have a picture of the recent Pint of Science event that a bunch of wonderful grad students here at Wright Lab helped to organize. So this is a public event where scientists go out to like local bars and coffee shops and give talks on their work that are accessible to public understanding. And yeah, we've done it for a few years in New Haven now, and the public has really enjoyed it as far as I can tell. Whenever I've gone to a talk, there's been so many people engaging with it and having a lot of fun just thinking about science topics. Also in this realm are debates, policy meetings, and interviews. So the picture on the left is a photo I took of various national lab and executive office logos when I had a meeting with the House Science Committee. Another way is traditional journalism, which might seem to be falling to the wayside, but is kind of adapting. So these are things like newspaper and magazine interviews, TV appearances, radio appearances, things like that. So maybe in like popular science magazines that are still very popular. Big area that's coming up now is online communication. So things like blogs, podcasts, and social media. But the problem with this is that there's a lot of misinformation out there. So people who are really scientists need to find ways to distinguish themselves from pseudoscience. I just include some screenshots of some online accounts that I really like for like science communication. E&M PhD is run by the other Morgan in the grad student cohort, Morgan C. She's in Laura Newberg's lab. This is a super fun account to follow. And finally, art. People don't typically think of science as relating to art, but there's huge artistic components in what we do. This photo I've seen several versions of this, but this is a piece of art representing climate change over the past century and a half. So starting from 1850, the average global temperature every single year. And you can see really where climate change has taken effect. So it's a very powerful like piece of art that really simply like conveys an important idea. So some principles of communicating with the public. This is an incomplete guide based on my own experiences. So hopefully you all will have like a lot to add to this very soon. But the first and I think most important thing is to understand who you're communicating with. And when I say communicating, that's really like a back and forth. It's a conversation. If you're doing most of the talking, you can still be watching your audience's expressions, body language, allowing them time to process information, ask questions, and see the level of engagement. And then be open to changing up the flow of the conversation to keep your audience engaged. Another part of this comes understanding. So talking to a fellow scientist, a policymaker, students at an outreach event, and your parents are all very, very different tasks. So you have to kind of have an understanding of not just who your audience is, but what do they value? What are the preconceived notions that they might have about you and about your topic? How is that going to be a barrier or build a bridge to what you want to talk about? Also things like, what do they want out of this conversation? How does that relate to what you want out of this conversation? So that's a lot of questions, but these are all things to consider. You don't necessarily have to have like concrete answers to all of these things, but you can let these things inform how you go about having these conversations. With this, you want to frame your message accordingly. And when it comes to communicating with the public, that often means sacrificing nuance. As scientists, we love the nitty-gritty details. We think that those are super interesting, and that's where like our passion lies. But the public wants more of the big picture, I'll say. And so when you frame various topics, you have to perhaps glaze over some of that stuff that you would otherwise really love talking about. So to give an example, sorry, this is a little text dense, but I'll go through it. Let's say I am having policy meetings in DC, and my goal is to get federal funding for particle physics. If I'm going to a congressional office of a liberal senator who has a history of supporting appropriations to the National Science Foundation and Department of Energy, this is not someone I need to really convince to fund science. They're probably already on my side about that. So I want to thank them for their support. Tell them about what their support has done for scientists and what challenges scientists are still facing. And then how do we work together? Those conversations might feel like they're less productive, but because like you're not needing to convince anybody of anything, but they're just as important because you're building a relationship. Versus when I have meetings with congressional offices of more conservative, say House representatives who are very interested in, say, the needs of their local constituents. Maybe they've spoken publicly about things like reducing the federal deficit. So they're really not looking to like spend money on things. I want to highlight some of the great successes of our field recently. And maybe these can be like inventions that people don't realize came from particle physics. And talk about things like funding basic science as being an investment, and using language that they understand, like making the US a global leader. They love buzzwords like that. And then we're looking for places where we can like find common ground on this topic. So you can see it's like the same, I have the same goal in both of these meetings, but they're framed two very different ways. So with that, yeah, there's also in like all of these conversations, no matter who you're talking to, a way to tell a story. Your audience isn't gonna remember a list of facts. Like you can think back to the past hour that we've been talking to you guys. You probably don't remember all of the facts that were on all of our slides. You remember laughing at one of the comics or thinking about how you would feel giving a talk at a conference. Things like that. People are more likely to remember emotional appeals. And people can relate to a narrative, which helps your topic feel important to them. And a narrative gives a natural place to like pause, reflect, and get people who were lost back on track. This is one of the best pieces of advice I think I ever got was to build multiple on-ramps onto your talk. So different places where you can like pause and summarize, and people who got lost can get back on track instead of just checking out of the whole thing. And finally, or not finally, but beware of jargon. And jargon can mean different things for different audiences. So ask yourself, what knowledge or understanding is my audience working with? Am I talking to people who have like a solid undergraduate understanding? Am I talking to people who took high school chemistry 20 years ago? Am I talking to people who maybe have never even like taken a high school science class? And like, what language am I going to use in each of those cases? And this goes beyond things like defining terms. It's not gonna help if I am talking to a group of middle schoolers and I give them like a dictionary of words before my talk because they don't care. They're just gonna like go on their phones. So using language your audience understands without talking down to them, because this helps them feel intelligent. Everyone wants to feel smart, right? So helping them feel like they're learning something and are like, or like can be as intelligent as you in this conversation can really help build that connection. And finally, practice. This always takes practice, even if you feel silly doing it. The number of times that I've like been talking to myself in the mirror about like things that I've known for a long time, like describing what a proton is. It feels really silly, but it really, really helps when you get into those meetings and you realize that you don't need to think about how to explain these things. You already have an idea of what to do. So if you're looking for an application for some science communication practice, I recommend submitting a comment to this Office of Management and Budget rule. So basically, the Office of Management and Budget is a branch of the federal government, and they've proposed new rules governing how science will be funded and managed. I won't go through all of this because I'm running up on time, but basically it will kind of obliterate how we understand how science is done. And so a great way to make sure that this rule doesn't go through is to follow this link through the APS. I'm also happy to DM this to anybody. And they will guide you through talking about your science and your experiences with science to hopefully help convince the federal government or the federal employees who are trying to push this rule through that science can't be done this way. So yeah, if you want to learn more about that, talk to me after. I have some thoughts on just things I ponder about DEI and how that all relates to science communication, but I know we're up on lunchtime, so yeah, if there's any comments, questions, thoughts, also feel free to email me about anything, because I know speaking up in a group can be a little scary sometimes.
Any questions for Morgan? Or anybody else? Seeing none, thank you very much.